I thought we could think about these three questions. So how many community centers are underutilized or vacant? How many new businesses fail in the first year? And how many pedestrian bridges actually get used? And particularly that last question, please bear with me because I'm very likely going to be using that analogy quite often as I go forward. But just talking about that pedestrian bridge. So I used to live in Westville, for those of you who know Durban, and so I drove on the M13 a lot. And those who drive the M13 a lot will know that there are many pedestrian bridges that cross the freeway. But for the most part, every single day, I would see people crossing the very busy, very dangerous freeway. Not ideal when they've kind of got a solution. And so what we're going to go through, the hows, the whats, the whys, is an attempt to prevent those type of things happening. Companies, organizations, businesses, governments spending millions of rands on solutions they think people need, but having never actually engaged with people and essentially wasting resources, time, money. So yeah, just to think about those three questions. But essentially, what is design thinking? So design thinking, it's more than just a tool, it's really a mindset. Because design thinking has a lot of different approaches and a lot of different tools. So it's a mindset that helps you solve problems creatively. And at the core of it, and you'll see as we go through this whole thing, are humans. So it's a human-centered, it's often sometimes referred to as human-centered design rather than just design thinking. And so essentially it's encouraging organizations to focus on the people they're working for rather than just the product they're developing or the service they're offering, rather to focus on that end user of that product or that service. And really kind of a niche thing around design thinking is that when we sit down to create a solution for a particular business need, our first question should always be, what's the human need behind that business need? So very broadly, that's what design thinking is about. Why it's important. And towards the end of my session, I'm going to just give a couple of very clear examples of kind of the impact of design thinking, but just why it's important. It can help you, it can help your team to really surface unmet needs of people that you're working for. So you might think you're meeting their needs, they might even think you're meeting their needs, but design thinking and the process behind design thinking enables you to really bring to the forefront these needs that you may not actually even be meeting. And it also reduces the risk associated with launching new ideas. If we think about that pedestrian bridge, I'm not an engineer, but I'm sure those cost millions of rands. And so going through and using a design thinking process enables organizations or companies to make sure whatever they're putting out there is what people actually need, and helps to reduce that risk of spending millions on something that's actually not going to be used. And it generates solutions that are revolutionary, not just incremental. Maybe they are sometimes incremental, so it's not always the big flashy thing, but it just really does help a company take big steps rather than kind of that slow, steady move forward, which can sometimes eventually kill an organization. And it helps organizations learn faster. I think often people go through a longer design thinking training and they realize how much work goes into design thinking. It's not a quick, simple process. It's long, it's sometimes frustrating, but the point is that employing this still helps organizations to learn faster, to fail quicker, and to reiterate or iterate what they're doing so that the next time it's a quicker and quicker process, essentially. So the three pillars of design thinking, I'm going to talk about the three pillars and the 5 phases, but the 3 pillars which kind of wend their way through each of those phases are empathy, ideation, and experimentation. And empathy, like I've said earlier, because design thinking has a human-centered core, the foundation of design thinking is empathy, to be able to empathize with the person we're creating for or the person we're serving, even if it's down the line. So even if I'm creating a component, as an example, that goes into a vehicle, if I'm able to empathize not only with the person I'm selling that individual component to, but the person who's purchasing the car, I'm able to design that much better. Just as quite a random example. And then ideation is kind of the creative core of design thinking. And so what a lot of people who have done design thinking will tell you is it's all about just a kind of conglomerate of ideas. You know, it's not just I've got one solution and I've got 3 ideas that might work. It's hundreds and hundreds of ideas, and we'll get into that a bit later. And then the third and final pillar is experimentation. So the idea that my first solution to a problem may not be the best solution, may not be the right solution. And I'm going to have to acknowledge that. I'm going to need to experiment. I'm going to have to test my solution. I'm going to have to go back and fix my solution. I'm going to have to make tweaks and changes and then kind of test that again. And just the attitude of experimentation is really important to design thinking. So within those 3 pillars, like I mentioned, there's 5 phases. And in this image, they set out quite linear, as if empathize is the first phase and test is the last phase. And while it does kind of follow this train, it may be a very circular process. And it may be that maybe you reach the ideation phase and you realize you actually have to go back to the empathize phase, or you reach the test phase, and obviously the way design thinking works, you would naturally go back to the prototyping phase. So this is really just to let you see those 5 phases, but don't get bogged down by the fact that it looks like a linear model in this image. It really often isn't. So the 5 phases, which I'll run through now, and which I'll chat about some of the tools that are incorporated in these 5 phases, are empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and then test. So the first phase, like I mentioned, is empathize. And I know I've spoken a lot about empathy, but like I said, it is the core foundation to design thinking. So all projects will begin with the empathize phase. And that's because empathy towards our end users, like I've said, is the very core of the design thinking mindset. And the goal during this phase is to gain a deep understanding of the actual users, not necessarily even just why they're using your exact product, but what moves them as an individual, what troubles them, what does their day look like, what causes friction for them, what are issues for them, what are their actual problems, and then what is the solution that they really need for those problems. So some of the tools we use to do that, for example, I mean, throughout this, I'm just going to mention 1 or 2 tools. There are a lot of tools, but for example, observation. So observation is potentially, maybe some people see this more of the kind of creepier way to empathize with people, but really observation is just putting yourself in a situation and seeing what's going on. So if you're wanting, for example, to design a better playground in a park, what you would do was you would go and sit on a bench next to the playground and just watch what happens. See who's coming to use the playground, who's not using the playground, who's using the park but not the playground, what are the animals doing, what are the trees doing. So that's just kind of one of the tools, and obviously interviews form another tool, but yeah, lots of different tools that you can use during the empathize phase. The second phase is define. So once you've done this empathizing, and during that empathizing phase, you're collecting a lot of data. And obviously the more data you have, the easier it is to kind of define your problem. And this is where people often get bogged down, especially when we're experts in a certain field. We often come and think we know the solution kind of offhand, and that's why empathy is so important, to make sure we haven't yet defined the problem. We're coming to say, you know what, we think maybe we know the problem, but let's do this and see if our problem is maybe not what we thought it was. And once you've done that, you then just define the problem. And this is often kind of the key point in the design thinking process, because it guides everything you do. And when you get distracted, which often can happen in design thinking because there's so much going on. The idea is that the define phase or defining your problem is kind of like your North Star. So that when you've gotten lost, you can look back to your North Star and it can kind of reorientate you, put you back on the right track if you've got a little bit lost. So some of the tools, just very briefly, are the 5 whys and the 4 Ws. So the 5 whys, anybody from kind of a manufacturing background would likely know about the 5 whys. It's a lean thinking principle, lean thinking problem solving principle, and it's essentially asking 5 whys. So I come and I see that a friend of mine orders takeaways a lot. Why does he order takeaways a lot? He likes eating food. And I start asking 5 whys. So why does he like eating fast food? And then I come with another answer to that. And then I ask a why to that question. So that I'm not just asking one question and thinking that my answer to that question is my solution. That I'm digging as far down as I can into that kind of problem to know why. And then the 4 Ws are who, what, where, and why. So who is experiencing this problem? What is the problem? Where does the problem present itself? And why does it matter? So once I've defined my problem, or once I think I know kind of generally what the problem is, I can start asking those 5 whys, or looking at the 4 Ws, the who's, the what, the where, the why, and I can come up with a single sentence so that I fully understand my problem statement. Again, I realize that there are a lot of different tools to do this, and we just unfortunately don't have time to go through all of them. The third phase is the ideate phase. So this is sometimes the most fun phase, and the idea here, or at least I enjoy it the most, is quantity over quality. So essentially in this phase, there are no bad ideas. There are tools here, and we'll go through them in a bit. But there's one of the tools, for example, is a process called the most ridiculous idea ever. So once you've got your problem, you're now looking at ideas to solve that problem. And there's things like common things that most people know about, like brainstorming. But the idea really behind ideation is to create or to come up with as many ideas as possible. No such thing as we can't do that because it's always done, or that's just a bad idea, or that wouldn't work, we don't have the money. The ideation phase is really about just stepping outside your comfort zone, outside your box, and just coming up, like I said, with ridiculous ideas. So during the ideation phase, there's 2 processes that happen. There's a divergent process and a convergent process. So during the divergent process, you start with a prompt, which would obviously be related to your problem statement, and then you generate many ideas. Just there's another tool you can use, and it's called 100 ideas. And the idea is you just throw out ideas non-stop till you get to 100 solutions to that prompt. And then once you've done a bit of divergent thinking and you've used 1 or 2 tools, you then swap over to convergent thinking. So you start with these 100 ideas, and you start looking at maybe of those 100 ideas, 20 of them are actually speaking to the same thing. So you put those all together, or you start the process of, okay, we've come up with all these awesome ideas, but you know what, you're right, we don't have the budget this year to do this solution. That gets parked over here, and it allows you to have all of these ideas and start to converge them to a solution. And one of the reasons here why we speak about no bad ideas is because even though during this process perhaps you come up with what is a bad idea, that idea, whether it's not feasible or not viable, it may still spark someone else's creativity. It may still spark another solution. So bad ideas can then lead on to better ideas. And then the fourth phase is prototyping. So now you've gone through a phase of empathize and you understand the people you're creating for. You've defined their true problem, their actual problem, and you've come up with a host of solutions, and you've worked through that process to bring those solutions down to maybe 2 or 3 solutions. And the idea here is then not to build a bridge over the freeway and a tunnel, just in case some people don't want to use the bridge and some people want to use the tunnel. The idea is to then just prototype. Before you actually spend the money and the time creating a new product or developing a new service, you prototype that. And the idea here is that it allows you to, one, find in that prototype your intersection between what is feasible for your company, what is desirable for the individual, and what is actually viable. And when those 3 intersect, is where you can say, okay, this is an idea that would actually work. So it's also a way of just simply testing those ideas that you've come up with. So during the prototyping phase, again, there's a lot of different tools. Some of them, for example, are storyboarding, paper prototyping, or service prototyping. And in design thinking, and for those who have been through design thinking workshops, you'll know, depending on what problem we're trying to solve and what solution we're coming up with, is that this process sometimes involves press stick and pipe cleaners and cardboard and ribbon and just society sticks and kind of ridiculous things like that. And you land up building something with those things to kind of let someone still experience what you mean. Particularly if you're developing a new service, you would then do what's called service prototyping, and you would role play. You would bring in your team, and you would assign them each roles to play in the service, and you would then act that out with a user. So the prototyping phase is obviously very closely linked to the final phase, which is the testing phase. So once you've developed your prototype, whatever that may look like, and again, the beauty behind design thinking is there's not a lot of rules around what that has to look like. One of the stories that I've heard before is a company was pitching a new app, and they had obviously done a MVP of this app, a digital on a phone that they could then present, and it crashed moments before they were meant to present it. So they got some cardboard, cut out a phone template, and acted out the app with someone behind inside the phone, and were very successful in explaining that prototype and selling their idea. So it's that kind of thing. It's not necessarily spending a lot of money prototyping. It can be a really cheap prototype, but the idea is to create your prototype and then to move on to phase 5, where you test your prototype. And during this phase, the idea is to introduce your prototype to actual users, not necessarily other people in your team or in your company who haven't been involved in this process, but to a group of people who will actually be using this product or service that is developed out of the prototype. And the idea is not to prototype test and then say, okay, we've done a good job. The idea is that once we prototype, we realize, we get feedback from the users that, okay, you hit the mark on some of these things, they were great. And some of these things were terrible, I hated them. And it allows you to go back to the prototyping phase and to maybe shift your prototype a little bit and change it. This phase may actually even make you go back to your your define phase, your problem statement phase, where you realize, you know what, we thought we actually got this problem right, but now that we've tested this with our users and got their feedback, we realize we actually were a little bit off, and you can start that process again, which, like I said earlier, does sound like a long process, and it is, but the point is, it saves you time and money in the long run, where you're not developing a product that ultimately people are uninterested in. Yeah, so that's the final phase of those 5 phases. Yeah, like I said, trying to do for everyone in 25 minutes what we would normally do in 2.5 days. But I also just wanted to chat around some of well-known or bigger design thinking success stories that you may not have realized were design thinking success stories. So the first one is Airbnb. I am fairly certain that a lot of people on the webinar have rented an Airbnb. I know I've rented a lot. And Airbnb in 2009 was making $200 a week. They were close to closing. There were 3 founders of Airbnb, and clearly $200 a week is not much to kind of write home about. And they went through a design thinking process, not, if you read their story, not as specific as what I've explained to everyone, but they kind of accidentally fell into design thinking processes. And one of the founders had a design school background. And using that process, though, they were able to shift Airbnb from that $200 a week business to what we know it is today, as a $1 billion business, and just a very successful business. And then some other examples, the Clean Team, which I think is a really interesting case study to look at, but which looks at a very kind of advanced urine diversion toilet that was developed for kind of poorer areas in Ghana, but which employed a design thinking process, because they were finding a lot of government organizations were spending money on bringing sanitation to certain areas, and it was just failing and it wasn't working. So they decided to follow this process and have had massive success in that. Another example is Stanford Hospital. So Stanford Hospital has a great relationship with the D School in Stanford, and as an exercise just during one of their kind of design thinking workshops, they went through a process of redesigning the emergency room for patients. And they went and kind of observed how patients were experiencing the emergency room, and made suggestions to the Stanford Hospital. And since then, one of the brand new hospitals in Stanford has used the design thinking process to set up their full hospital, and a couple other units have been redesigned using the design thinking process, and have seen huge kind of improvements even in health of patients just because of using this process. And then another process, one other organization that used design thinking was a municipality in Denmark, who were designing a food service for retired and kind of elderly people who were dependent on the state, who were just had really kind of low standards of living. And they went through a design thinking process, and through that were able to fully redesign how they interacted with these senior citizens, and design what was called the Good Kitchen, and have just seen huge kind of increases in the standard of living for these individuals. So for me, just looking at those examples and what we've seen design thinking achieve in our programs and in some of our partner organizations, we just fully believe in the power of design thinking for making huge changes like Airbnb or the Clean Team in Ghana, but to making smaller shifts in organizations and how organizations do certain things, or kind of how organizations design certain products. So yeah, very briefly in 25 minutes, that was an introduction to design thinking and to the principles of design thinking. But we would, as Innovate Durban, love to expand on this and to introduce more and more people around Durban and beyond to design thinking and to the capabilities behind design thinking. So I know Aurelia will speak a bit about our classes a bit later on, but yeah, that is an overview from me.
Great, thank you, Amy. I thought that was quite insightful, especially having been through the training myself, and just to hear you kind of summarize that in literally 25 minutes. So thank you for that. Just a reminder before I hand over to our next panelist that I see some questions have been coming through on the Q&A function. We will try and answer those during the live Q&A session after Anissa has spoken. So if you could just be patient with us, and we will answer those live during the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Anissa Nassar. As I mentioned, Anissa is the Business Innovation Manager at Transnet Port Terminals, and she's going to go through her own experience using design thinking, but also talk to what she has experienced during her time at Transnet and using this methodology. Anissa, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Aurelia, and thank you to you and your team and Innovate Durban for firstly inviting me to be part of this panel and to sit on this Catapult series. You know, it's really exciting. I think we've built a good relationship in the last few years, and I look forward to it just evolving and getting better and better. And these are the kinds of things like this webinar series that we really need to be part of the Durban innovation landscape. So really, thanks a lot for this and for putting this together. So I'm just going to go and share my screen now. Can you see the screen? Okay, great. So for my presentation, I'm going to be going through some of the use cases for design thinking at my organization, as well as my journey of design thinking. 1 second. Is the screen, are the slides changing? Amy, can you see the slides changing yet?
They're not changing at the moment, Anissa. Just try click in the center and then try one more time.
Okay, it's a bit better, thanks. Okay, so just in terms of my design thinking journey. So a few years ago, I found myself at a point in my career and in my learning experience where I was slightly disillusioned, you could say. I found myself thinking, I was searching for something new, for something different, a different skill, a different experience. I was thirsty for knowledge. And I had looked at your popular and your usual kind of training and short courses that were available, and nothing really tickled my fancy. So I was discussing this with a colleague of mine, and he actually mentioned design thinking to me. I hadn't heard of it before that. So then I went and I started researching design thinking and what it was about and the courses that were available. And that led me to the D School that runs through the University of Cape Town, Hasso Plattner School of Design Thinking at UCT, who are really the authorities on design and on design thinking. And when I went there, you must understand, I am an accountant by profession. I'm a chartered accountant. So my background is very technical. It's very much spreadsheets and numbers and deliverables and deadlines. Things are black and white. There isn't even gray, you know? So this creativity, this colorfulness that came from design thinking was a little bit out there for me at first. I mean, when you're an accountant, the words creative and accounting don't even go together in the same sentence. So when I went for this course and I was exposed to what design thinking was about, and it was a very intense 3 days workshop, I really had my mind absolutely blown in that short space of time. At first, it seemed a bit airy-fairy, you could say, but as you go through the steps and as you go through the exercises and you go through understanding the problem and defining it, etc., you start to see how it all comes together. And it opened my mind to a whole new world. And what a dazzling place it is. And it really brought together that, that magic that you need to really solve complex problems. And at that point, it felt so right. After the first day of the training, it just, you know, it was something that at first was so strange to me, but I really enjoyed. I really took to it. It opened my mind to so much more. And then from there, I had to think about, okay, do I want to further my real formal education? Now, when I finished my board exams, I said to myself, I'm never going to study again. It's a very long road. to being a CA, as many people here understand, and it's a great profession. I take nothing away from it. It's so important for the world economy. It's so important for businesses. But when I passed my board exams, I was ready to donate my books to the nearest bonfire. Of course, I didn't do that, but I wasn't too keen on studying. However, after a few years, then you start to think, you know what, I need to increase my knowledge, and where do I go? So I first went through the design thinking, and then that opened me up to a wider range of programs and tertiary education that was available for me. So currently what I'm doing is that I'm doing a Master's of Philosophy in Inclusive Innovation, also through UCT. Now, again, you've got this accountant who is attempting some kind of philosophy, which doesn't seem to be like it should be going together at all, but actually it does. It works well. I'm thoroughly enjoying the course, and I'm thoroughly enjoying doing my research. And I got here all thanks to design thinking and what it taught me. Okay, so just going into our use cases. There's 3 main use cases that I want to focus on. And I'm not going to speak too much about the actual workshop and the ins and outs of the workshop, but I'm going to talk about what we took out of these workshops and the variety that came through these workshops. Also, we do use design thinking internally in our internal sort of brainstorming sessions. But these 3 workshops were ones that we did with a lot of external parties, which is why I want to speak about them. So the first one we did in East London. This was last year, November, and it was a 1-day workshop. So we had to put everything into 1 day. And for this workshop, our how might we question, which comes through in your defined stage of your design thinking, was how might we improve the socio-economic circumstances of communities in the area and in the current ecosystem. Now, this workshop, we used it as a pilot. We used it as a pilot for developing a new approach to solving the complex problems that we come across. As you can see, this was very much on the socio-economical aspect of communities within East London, which is a very, very broad kind of problem to be dealing with. There's lots of different stakeholders. There's lots of different intricacies and dependencies, and it's not a simple kind of thing that you're trying to attempt to solve. So what we did here was that we said, okay, we need to change our thinking. The way we've currently been thinking in the way that we solve, are we really achieving the kind of results that we need to achieve? So we said, all right, let's get together the different participants. And we had people from Transnet, from the NGO Coalition, from the municipality, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the university, the Walter Sisulu University, as well as the Eastern Cape Socioeconomic Consultative Council. All your necessary stakeholders who would be interested in this topic and solving for this topic. And we brought everyone together and we said, let's pilot design thinking as a tool to help solving for these problems. And then we had 2 different teams. They went through the 5 steps of design thinking, and they went out through in the defined stage or from your empathy to your defined stage, and they spoke to people within the town of East London, and got that understanding and that observation, all of them to get that empathy to really know what it is that the people experienced. Because exactly what Amy said earlier, it's so important for you to go and speak to the people who you are solving for to ensure that you are actually understanding what they need and meeting their needs. We are in a lot of our education and how we are set up, we go from problem to solution. We're very solution driven, especially if you are technically minded. You very much, let's just find the solution, let's just find the solution. But sometimes we need to take that step back, and we need to spend more time in that understanding and observing phase in order for us to get the right solution that's actually going to work without you having many, many different attempts at solving that problem. So there were two solutions that came out of this. One was looking at a golfing competition that could help to create more caddies and more professional golfers within the East London area, because they do have a golf course. And the other was looking at how you could use the owners of equipment manufacturers through Transnet to train youngsters from a technical, mechanical kind of perspective, and then they could go out and start their own businesses. So what I want to focus on is the key learning. So one of the key learnings that came out of this was the openness to the design thinking process. That the people in the room, once you took them through the stages, they were like, no, this is definitely something that we can use. This is something that we need to adopt, because it gives us that insight that maybe we were lacking before. So there was a lot of openness to trying something new. There's also the enjoyment of creativity. What Amy spoke about, you find yourself using cardboards and papers and pipe cleaners and all of these things. So, you're working with your hands, you're now using Play-Doh that you haven't used for a long, long time in your life. And often people assume that they are not creative. If you're not in a creative field, you tend to think that you're not a creative person, or you don't have that creativity in you. But that's not true, because we were all children at one time in our lives. And you've still got that child in you who's waiting for that opportunity to come out, who's waiting for that opportunity to sort of dial into those really long lost, but still very, very valuable insights that come through the sort of learning process that children go through. And the creativity that came in the team, people were laughing in their groups when they were building their stuff and laughing at each other's little pipe cleaner man, but in a good way, in a good, wholesome way. And the last thing was a willingness to use the process going forward. So within one day of using design thinking, we had managed to get that buy-in from people in the room to say, okay, yes, we piloted this as a kind of approach, and we're happy to use this approach so that we can, go up those stairs and we can come to those kinds of solutions that we do need in order for us to solve for our problems. The next use case is the design thinking workshop that we held with our AIM students. So Transnet Port Terminals runs a program for students who are in university. It's mainly students who are kids of employees of Transnet and Transnet Port Terminals. And they come through to us twice a year during the two main holidays in June, July, and then again December, Jan. And they are different, first year, second year, third year. They're also studying a lot of different fields, in completely different fields. And each time they come to us, we have a different program ready for them in that 3 to 5 days that they do join us for. So sometimes they come through and they sit with mentors in the fields that they are studying, and sometimes we take them to operations. It's a couple of different things. So what we did with them in January this year was that we ran a 2-day workshop with them. And for this 2-day workshop, we posed an organizational problem to them. This organizational problem was around training and development. And we explained to them what the problem was, that our training is still very classroom based and people work shifts, it's difficult, timing, etc., and took them through the 5 steps along with my 2 colleagues, Sharon and Pravina, who are really awesome. They're my stars. They helped me to facilitate these sessions, having been on design thinking training themselves. And the students went and they spoke to employees in order to understand how they see training from their perspective. And we got solutions that was around technology like apps, as well as more process solutions. So how can we create capacity so people can go for training? And these ideas have been passed on to our HR training department, who will look at how they can incorporate it to provide a better training service. And so the key learnings that came out of this workshop was on the submerging nature of design thinking. So the fact that you have to go and that you really submerge yourself in the problem. You're not looking at it from a high level. You're going deeper. You're going and you are speaking to people. You're observing what they do. You're observing how the process runs. You're understanding different perspectives. You're putting yourself in the shoes of others. You are looking through their eyes. So all of the benefit that comes out of that was one of the key learnings within this workshop. Another key learning was the fun experience. Design thinking really is a lot of fun. There's a lot of activities that you do between each step, and each of these activities, not only are they fun, they teach you something as well. I remember when I went for my training, like never before had I been asked, how do you feel experienced as a food? I mean, I would never even have thought about something like that there. Yes, I can think about how food makes me feel, but not necessarily how I'm feeling, expressed as a food. So it throws you into this fun way of thinking and this different way of thinking that possibly a lot of our minds are not conditioned to, but the mind is a beautiful thing. It can be made to do lots of different things. We just need to point it in the right way. And the last one was teamwork. Now, we've had these students who came together. A lot of them don't know each other. They are studying different fields, very diverse in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the different fields that they are studying, the places that they are from, and they had to work together. They were thrown together into 3 teams over just 2 days, which is not a lot of time, but they had to really work together to come up with the right kind of solutions. So that was really great. The last workshop that I want to speak about is the industry workshop. So this we had in February this year, along with our sister operational division, Transnet National Port Authority. This was a 2-day workshop where we invited a lot of stakeholders from industry. So cargo owners and hauliers, the eThekwini municipality, Metro Police, the South African forwarding agents. So this workshop was aimed at helping to solve for the congestion problem on Bay Head Road. So in the last few months, from last year sometime, there's been a lot of congestion on the Bay Head Road. And this workshop was put together to bring all of the necessary participants in this ecosystem together to say, how can we collectively solve for this? And how can we collaborate in order for us to solve for this? And in this workshop, we started off with journey maps. So we did journey maps from a trucker or a haulier's perspective, and we did journey maps from a terminal perspective. We also mixed up our teams so that you had different people from both sides or from all sides within the 2 teams. So that gave the Transnet personnel who were looking at the trucker's perspective an opportunity to understand their challenges. In turn, truckers and cargo owners had an opportunity to understand the challenges that the terminal experienced. And in those 2 days, we grew a lot. We learned a lot and we grew a lot. We found out that how important the collaborative nature of design thinking is, because remember, it's not a one person, it's a team, or it's many teams that have to come together. And when you collaborate, you are getting to trust someone else. You are building trust. You are inspiring someone else, and you in turn are being inspired. Collaboration really is very much a learning experience. We learn from each other. We are able to talk to each other. We are able to debate. We are able to bounce ideas off each other. We want to get as many ideas as possible. In order for you to do that, you need to collaborate. And in turn, we are supporting each other. That leads to you building a relationship. We now have the opportunity to build relationships in areas and with people that we didn't have before. As a port terminal or as a terminal operator, for example, we don't, at the Durban Container Terminal, our customers are vessel lines. They're not cargo owners. But our service affects cargo owners. So we needed to interact with them in order for us to empathize with them so that we can build those real solutions that help us to address our complex problem. And the last key learning was the buy-in. and the ownership that comes out of this. When you have a group of people working together to solve for common problems that they are all experiencing, you find that it becomes easier for the attendees or for the participants to look at how can we really own the solution. What do we need to do differently? We've come up with a great solution, but what does it mean? How do we live out the solution? So now you find that people are owning the solution, they're buying into the solution, they're doing their bit for the solution. And in here, our solutions are focused on our mandatory truck booking system, group import release, and improved communication. And since the workshop has happened, we have had some improvements in our congestion. So it really is something that has a lot of benefit to it. Now, I just want to sort of wrap up and close up by speaking about the flexibility of design thinking. In these 3 use cases that I've just spoken about, you'll find that they were very different. One was looking at socioeconomic problems, one was looking at organizational problems, the other was looking at an ecosystem problem. Yet we used design thinking in all of them. We also adapted how long our workshops were for. One was 1 day, the other was 2 days. So it shows you how you can use design thinking across a variety of problems. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You're going to be able to design design thinking the way you need to meet your needs. Also, if you looked at the audiences or the participants, were also very varied, because that's the beauty of design thinking. Anyone can do design thinking, and you want there to be as much diversity in the room in order for you to solve it. And you always want to remember the human-centered essence of design thinking in order for you to solve correctly. So just to close off, how important it is to learn, how important it is to increase our experience and increase our knowledge and just learn something new. I started off my design thinking journey just wanting to learn something new, and it's taken me in such an amazing direction. So my advice to anyone out there is that if you want to learn something new, go ahead, do it. And I would definitely advise design thinking as a key sort of thing for you to learn. So thanks, Amy. I think that's me. Thanks, Aurelia.
Okay, thank you so much, Anissa. Yeah, both Amy and Anissa's presentations were so informative, and I think it really gave us all a great idea of what design thinking is all about, how you can use it, and especially how important it is to any organization or project that you're working with. I mean, we've tried it out at Innovate Durban. We are running slightly over time. I'd like to begin with the Q&A session. There are a few questions that we'd like to answer live. I think I'd like to start with the first question. There is a question around local examples of implementation of design thinking, which comes from Joe White. I think Anissa has answered that to some extent with regards to some of the examples that she's been involved in at Transnet. What we'll try to do with that question is that we'll also, when sending out the presentation, perhaps put together a few other local examples within the country that we've kind of seen and have used design thinking. The question on climate change from Nhlanhla. Nhlanhla, we'd like to learn more about your organization, and I think that that question requires a more in-depth answer. So we'll also answer that question post the webinar. Sibongile's question about design thinking. Amy, could you please answer live Sibongile's question, as well as the other question from Joe about linking design thinking with lean leadership?
100%. So in terms of the question around can anyone be a design thinker and who's the target audience for this kind of workshop, like Anissa said, anyone can do design thinking. It's honestly, the simplicity of it means that it really doesn't matter what your product is, what your service is, who you are as an individual, what your skill level is, your education level, even what your interest is, even the chartered accountants. So really design thinking is aimed for everyone, and everyone can implement it in their day-to-day life, in their job, no matter what. Obviously, it just needs a bit of tweaking here and there, which is again great, because design thinking kind of speaks to that. And then Joe's thinking around how design thinking interfaces with lean leadership. So I've been on a weird journey where my last job was very heavily focused on lean leadership and lean thinking. And then obviously this job introduced me to design thinking. And I think they interface really well. They're both trying to achieve similar things. So lean leadership, there's a huge focus on the customer, there's a huge focus on continuous improvement, and obviously also solving problems with as much of the correct information as possible. And I mean, you'll see how they kind of link when I mentioned those 5 whys being originally a design thinking, a lean thinking tool. So while there are a lot of ways that they do intersect and they do speak to each other, and are both trying to do similar things, at the same time, from my experience, design thinking, because of the creative nature of it, a lot of, and I'm trying to say this as unoffensively as possible, but a lot of bigger corporations and more kind of old school thinkers are often closed off to design thinking because it can seem more airy-fairy, you're playing with press stick and pipe cleaners and whatnot. So while they are trying to solve the same thing or often speak to each other, there's often a case where kind of a design thinking process doesn't necessarily get championed by management, just because of the nature of design thinking. Hopefully I've answered that in a bit, but it is very interesting to see how they do intersect.
Okay, thanks, Amy. There is a question from Vincent Kwanazi around what happens if you're trying to solve a problem for the public transport commuters, but then you realize the taxi owners or industry will be against the solution. So this is now dealing with different stakeholders who possibly have opposing views. Amy or Anissa, could one of you please answer that, or at least give a response? And if you're unable to, we can always answer this in depth after the webinar.
I would just firstly ask Vincent if they included the Taxi Owners Association in the first place. So do they include them when they were trying to solve for them? And if they haven't, then they should try and include them as much as possible and try to see how they can build that relationship and ensure that whatever it is that they're trying to solve for addresses the challenges that are currently faced by the Taxi Owners Association as well. I don't know, Amy, if you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, we would never face any hurdles, but realistically, we obviously do. So like Anissa said, just making sure we're including every stakeholder so that the solution does then speak and will be kind of accepted by everyone. Otherwise, you're going to land up building pedestrian bridges that no one's going to use.
Okay, great. There's also another question from Anonymous around establishing a living lab in the Free State, and they'd like to find a way of learning from Innovate Durban. So I'll just respond to that by saying, let's get in touch post-webinar and see how we can collaborate and also share our experiences from the learnings thus far. Another question from Vinny wanting to know about the Innovate Durban and Transnet plans this year. Briefly, I'll answer that just to say there's quite a few exciting plans. Innovate Durban and Transnet have been partnering for a few years already. There are some plans around some new technologies that we are hoping to collaborate on this year, and we are already in talks with Transnet, Anissa, and the team at Transnet Port Terminal. So quite excited with that. So please keep an eye out for that. I'm just trying to check. There is another question from Molefi on how do you overcome the issue of a language barrier when you conduct design thinking, especially in rural communities or people with minimal or little education. Amy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I actually meant to add that into my earlier answer around can anyone design think. Um, so obviously in 25 minutes it's difficult to express the depth and the range of design thinking, but there's just a host of examples of design thinking facilitators going into communities where maybe there is a language barrier or some other kind of barrier, and really successfully running design thinking workshops. And the reason behind that is because design thinking can often be incredibly visual. So a lot of the tools, and obviously I wasn't able to go through all of them, are incredibly visual tools. So I know one example, I think it was in India. Sorry, I've got lots of international examples and not a lot of local ones. But in India, and they were trying to map out this kind of water system for a rural village, and obviously there was a huge language barrier there, and they were able to overcome that using visual tools. So doing storyboarding, where you're literally drawing a person on their kind of everyday and what they're doing, and something like drawing doesn't have a language barrier. So there's a lot of tools in design thinking that kind of reach over that language barrier. So it's possible. I would obviously always suggest when you are doing that to have someone on your team who can still communicate well in whatever local language you're using. But even without that, you're still able to overcome those challenges.
Okay, then I think there's only one last question that we'll take now from Sifiso, that he's got an idea that would assist SMEs around Durban. Sifiso, yes, please contact us directly around that, and let's see how we can brainstorm. So that brings us, thanks everyone, that brings us to the end of our Q&A. I'd like to thank you for engaging and asking the questions. If you'd like to contact us offline, Amy's going to share her screen in a moment with our contact details, and you're welcome to share any ideas with us or contact us individually. You'll see that there is a poll that's been taking place for the last 7 minutes. I am going to close it in a few seconds. So if you'd like to quickly answer the questions, for those of you who haven't already, please do so now. And like I said, our contact details are on the screen, so please feel free to interact with us. Follow us on our social media platforms, send us an email, call us. Our offices are now open. We are currently split between our offices at the Point Waterfront, as well as our Innovation Co-Lab, which we just recently opened in March, but due to lockdown, it has been closed. We are reopening the Innovation Co-Lab next week, which is quite exciting for us in a very phased approach. Also, with regards to future webinars, the next webinar is taking place on the 25th of June. The topic for that is around cash flow management. We have an experienced chartered accountant whose name is Jochen Faber. He supports Innovate Durban with our cash flow and all our financial management and issues around finance, and he is excellent. And I really think that will be quite worthwhile for you to join, or if you know of anyone that would be interested. With regards to design thinking, we are hosting, and we have been hosting for quite some time now, design thinking workshops, which are more in depth than this 1 hour session. And like Amy mentioned, we used to previously run it in person or face-to-face for 2.5 days. We are now adapting that to a virtual way of running the workshop. And we will be hosting the first in-depth session towards the end of July. So please also, if you are following us on social media, and also now that we do have your details, we will email you details around the more in-depth design thinking workshop. It really is a must-have for all organizations. Yes, and then, yeah, please feel free to contact us. I'd like to thank both Amy and Anissa for being fantastic facilitators and just sharing what design thinking is all about and your own experiences. We are going to be setting up design thinking groups on LinkedIn, which are closed groups that we will be sharing with you as well. And we'd like for those who would like to join those groups to please join when they are open and ready, and we will share information on those. So those who are more interested in design thinking and keeping the conversation going, we will be launching a tool for that really soon. So once again, thank you to everyone for joining. We will be sharing the presentation as well as the live recording to you. And for those who have missed it, please, we will be sharing the recordings with those who have missed it as well. So thanks everyone, and hope that you'll join us for our next session.